There is one thing above all else that will determine how successful you are with your workouts. And in this week's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're going to cue our introduction and dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast, brought to you by Muscle Activation Schaumburg. We're your hosts, Charlie
and Julie.
And today we're discussing the one thing that, in our opinion, in our experience, has the biggest influence over somebody's success with their workouts in terms of the results that they get, both in the short term and the long term. We want to let you know that if you want to start taking action on what we're talking about today, it's exactly what we can help you with at our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, where we specialize in muscle activation techniques. So all you need to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to our website, www.matschaumburg.com, click the big green button that says Get Started, and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. All right, so when people work out, they are oftentimes doing so with some intended result in mind. They want to get stronger. They want to get more fit. They want to change how their body looks. They want to change how their body feels and functions. And there's one thing above all else, all other possible variables that we have seen over the last decade and a half that has a stronger influence over somebody's ability to get those results that they're looking for than anything else, all right? And that's what we want to talk with you about today, because while there is so much hype around certain ways of working out, while there is so much hype around certain, pieces of equipment or, types of workouts or whatever, there is one thing that above all else has a way bigger influence than all of those things. That's what we're talking with you about today.
You're right, Charlie, and that one thing is consistency. And you've probably even heard this conversation before, like, oh, you gotta keep showing up and being consistent. But what we mean by consistent is meaning that there is regular input, regular positive input into your muscle system. This can apply to your weight training. You can also break this down. I was just thinking about this while Charlie was introing this. You can also break this down into like your body areas. Like, I know that we've had so many podcasts talking about, oh, you need to be consistent. I think everyone knows that. Like, oh, I got to keep showing up. But that means like showing up on the days that you feel funky. That means showing up on the days that you feel amazing. Like you can give it 1,000,000,000% relative to your norm. It's also showing up when, you feel like 10% is your 100% that day. That is a great day to show up. But also we're thinking about like joint areas. Like Charlie and I work with a lot of people that might have like an area or their system feels like, ooh, that's not feeling like the best. Like I've got a knee issue, or, I have systemic fatigue all the time, or I've got, a shoulder impingement thing I'm working through, right? So there's some not perfectness going on, right? And knowing like, hey, even with those conditions, you keep showing up and putting input into your body, into that shoulder that doesn't feel great all the time, into that knee that doesn't feel perfect. Because there's only one way to get your body to be stronger, and that is to have that consistent input. And so that consistency piece is not just showing up to the gym consistently, but is having that positive input into all the areas of your body that you hope to get stronger.
Exactly. Julie, have you ever met somebody who said, yeah, you know what, I've lifted weights, 2 to 3 times a week for the last 20 years and I'm still weak?
No.
Never. It does not matter their age. It does not matter their background, their experience, whether they were athletic in high school or not. It doesn't matter, okay? Because you show up consistently for that long of time, you're going to get the result. It is basically a guaranteed outcome that you are going to get those results, okay? I've never heard that either, where somebody's like, yeah, you know what? I have been to the gym, every single day. The problem is that the timeline that most people measure things on is way too short. Mm-hmm. People are like, well, I did it every day for like 3 months. Mm-hmm. I did it, I went 4 times a week for like 6 months. I did it, I went 4 times a week for a year. And they think that they're going to be like in the exact spot where they want to be. Look, you can make tremendous progress over 3 months, 6 months, a year. You can make remarkable progress over 5 years, a decade, 2 decades. Mm-hmm. Because what happens is every single day that you stack compounds on the last one, okay? And so it's like this little bit of building that you do every single time. And then if you look back over like 3 months, you're like, "Ugh," like, I don't know, like my weights went up like 5 pounds or whatever. Okay, you do 5 pound increase over every 3 months, that's 20 pounds over the year. You do that over 5 years, that's 100 pounds. That's 100 pounds you would go up if you just increased 5 pounds every 3 months. But nobody does that, right? Nobody does that. Nobody, meaning like it's so rare for somebody to keep showing up with that kind of mentality of like, oh, if I just, it doesn't have to be a huge amount that you're increasing. You just have to keep doing it. And you just keep doing it. You just keep at it. You just keep showing up, working out, improving your strength, improving your fitness level, even when it feels like nothing is happening. I guarantee you something is happening, and you do that long enough, it is darn near impossible for you to not get the results that you are wanting when done over a long enough timeline. And the truth is if you feel like you haven't gotten the results that you have been wanting, there's usually one of, I'm going to call it 3 different things going on. Number 1 is your frequency has not been enough, okay? You might go and be lifting, once a week when really you need to be lifting 3 times a week, okay? Number 2
That's
is,
a big one.
that's a huge one. That's a huge one, okay? Number 2 is your intensity when you go and do the thing may not be enough. And I'm not even just talking about like the intensity of the amount of weight that you're using, but your focus. Like, you're there and you're there for 45 minutes. Like, how much do you actually get done, during that time? Or are you spending more, spending too much time on your phone or talking or whatever it is, right? Like, lock in, get it done when you're there. And number 3, hey, have you given yourself a long enough timeline to actually get the results that you want, okay? Your body can change. You can get those results. It's going to take time, and the key is going to be consistency.
That's right. And you know what? I think a lot of people get motivated when they see like quote unquote results. And so sometimes results come around like in like ways that we don't think about. Like I just had this really good example with one of my clients. And one of the things that we offer, and I only have this timeline because I know she signed up for this program that we have that's 12 weeks long. And so I remember thinking, wow, I see her twice a week and it's been like 10 weeks. And every time I saw her, so that's 20 visits now, she'd be like, yeah, I don't know, like my hip is just, I must have bursitis, because it's just bothering me all the time. I mean, someone told me I had bursitis and I can't lay in a figure 4 position on my back on this side and that side. And then like when I go and do yard work, I just feel like really sore and achy after, and I'm helping my son paint. So all these physical activities that she was like feeling really beat up from, the sign of like low physical fitness, right? And then, I start her working out and I realize that she's a lot lower on the tolerance scale than I had thought, because she came from a background of like, oh my gosh, I do high intensity this and run 3 miles 3 times a week and all these things. But when she came to me, she was pretty beat up and, needing a lot of amping up. So we had to scale the workouts way back relative to what in her head was normal for a workout. And so for her, she kept being like not in a negative way, but just like, is this really doing anything? Is this really doing anything? And I said, at the end, hey, let's just keep going. Like, stop asking if it's doing anything. And eventually, near the end of the 12 weeks, she stopped commenting on things beating her up. And I just, I didn't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden, 1 week came around. She's like, I can't believe I did 4 hours of yard work and I feel great. I was like, wait, what? That's amazing. That's so great. And obviously, like, the workouts are progressing. But consistency is important even when you're not feeling like there's progress being made. But it is important for you to be progressing. So if you are pretty low on like because like what Charlie said with the intensity, like making sure that you are taking like those next little steps. A lot of people find what works for them. Like let's say you go to a Zumba class and it's the first time you ever worked out and it didn't like make you feel bad. So you're like, I'm going to do Zumba all the time. Well, that Zumba still has to progress for your body to progress, right? And so a lot of people do get stuck in that. But anyways, having that knowledge, that consistency of progression is going to lead to your body adapting. But yes, for most people, that adaptation period of getting that reassurance that it's working is a lot longer than most people realize. And I don't know if it's because of like in society we have all these 90-day programs or 30-day, 27-day reset, whatever, and you should be seeing results. But a lot of times that period is a lot longer. So make sure you're staying patient with yourself, but you're still doing the right actions of being consistent, progressing that intensity, showing up regularly. I love that Charlie brought up the idea where a lot of people will show up to a workout once or twice a week when really they probably need 3 to 4 times a week, because you need that consistent stimulus into your body to tell it to get stronger, to get more in shape, to improve its conditioning, to increase its endurance, right? All these things, you have to remind your body to do it, especially as you age. Your body is like on the decision of like, yeah, why do we need all this very expensive muscle? You don't ever use it. Why should we keep it, right? You don't use it, you lose it. That's totally applicable to the conditioning and size and quality of muscle. So make sure you are consistent. It's going to be the number one thing that determines how in shape or how fit you feel and how strong you are. But again, it has to be progressed over time.
That's exactly right. To build off that, when it comes to kind of changes that you're going to notice in your body, there are changes that a lot of people notice that happen really quickly. It's kind of like the low-hanging fruit from a results perspective. It's like, okay, yeah, like the easy stuff that I was doing that felt difficult before, now it actually feels easy. That actually feels easier. But then you get into this middle portion where your body will continue to change, but the changes that are taking place just take longer to happen. And it doesn't mean that they're not happening, but they just take longer. They take more exposure to the stimulus. They take, more variation in the intensity of the stimulus and even just higher intensity of the stimulus. So those changes are happening, but physiologically, they just take longer to happen. And so that can feel, when people are at that spot, that's when a lot of people feel like, oh, well, I've just plateaued. Like I did these workouts and like felt like I was, really good for like 3, 4, maybe 6 weeks. And then, I just kind of felt like I hit this plateau and didn't really see any difference over the next, 3 to 6 months or whatever. It's like, yeah, keep going, because there are changes that are taking place that may take 6 months, a year, 2 years for them to actually actualize, within your system of like, okay, yeah, wow, this is a new level that I'm operating at. And so it's really important that during that time when you feel like you're not making any progress, there are still things happening within your body. Keep with it. Your body just needs longer to adapt in terms of creating those kinds of results. And so that's something I've seen a lot with people as well. And I've seen that a lot, with your clients, Julie, is just the ones that, you've been working with for 2, 3, 5 years. Or longer, when they're coming in on a really consistent basis, is like you see around that 2, 3 year mark, it's like all of a sudden there's a shift that happens with them. It's like, okay, now we can, every month or two, we can make noticeable jumps with your weights, and we can increase the intensity of your cardio and all these things that we couldn't do before, because it just takes that long for these other physiological changes to happen within your system, where within the first few months, like we saw some increases in weight and everything like that, and it was kind of like steady for, the next year and a half or so.
Yeah, you're right, Charlie. I think that part is completely underestimated, and it might even become like, yeah, where people fall off the bandwagon because they're not getting that feedback of like, oh, I'm, making these big strides. I think when people start, they're always like, oh yeah, like I feel pretty good, especially if you're not getting injured and stuff, and you're like, wow, I can really get on this, because you're seeing all these changes and stuff. But the coolest changes do happen when you've been consistent for years, rather than a couple weeks or a couple months. A couple weeks and a couple months, those are amazing. You have to start there. But to have this thing where you keep showing up for years and decades, that's like a different level. And so if you can get to that point and just keep trucking along, and make sure that you are consistent with showing up, consistent with challenging your body, consistent with keeping that frequency high, that is where you're going to see the biggest progress in your health and fitness. And I think the biggest thing, at least in my opinion, for your health is to build that physical resilience. I think that when you need and notice the need for physical resilience is when it's the hardest to build it from scratch, which is when you're the oldest. And so when you are feeling like, wow, I feel really old, it's a great time to start. But it's even a better time to start if you can actually stay committed to it and consistent to do it before you feel like you are like the same number age-wise that you are.
Exactly. All right. So a couple of things that we've seen be really influential for people's consistency with their workouts is number one, using the 4 exercise for life principles that we talk about all the time on this podcast. It really changes how you do the exercise. So to make sure that the exercise is done in a way that's appropriate for your body. So you can leave the workout feeling stronger, feeling more mobile, and not feeling like your body got beat up from the workout. The other thing is muscle activation techniques and using MAT to address the muscles that are not communicating with your brain well. And so your brain doesn't have to compensate with those muscles, and you have all your muscles on board when you go into your workouts. It helps people stay more consistent because it minimizes a lot of the aches and pains that people feel. It minimizes a lot of soreness and tightness that people feel from working out. And when your body doesn't hurt, it's a lot easier to stay consistent with your workouts. So those are 2 really big things that we have seen time and again that allow people to stay consistent with their workouts. And so if those are things that you are wanting to experience for yourself, that's exactly what we can help you with at our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, where we specialize in muscle activation techniques. So all you need to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to our website, www.matschaumburg.com, click the big green button that says Get Started, and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We always appreciate your eyes on YouTube, your ears on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, wherever you consume our content. If you wouldn't mind leaving us a rating and review, it always means the world to us when you do. We are wishing you a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.